Welcome back to Built with Flutter. I'm your host, Matt Carroll. Today we continue working on the SpacePod app. For those of you who haven't seen our other episodes, SpacePod is a desktop app that helps me to download spaces from X/Twitter. Every Wednesday I host a space about Flutter and Dart, and then after that space I download our discussion and I upload it as a podcast episode. There's one important step that we need to make this tool more useful for that process, and that's the step that you see here where we choose the entry point. Now, in theory, we might want to do all sorts of audio editing, but in practice, at least up to this point, all I tend to do is chop off the beginning silence or sometimes the beginning music, depending on the way the Twitter/X system is working that week. And then I upload unedited audio so people get to hear everything that's said. Nonetheless, there's often about a minute of silence that we definitely want to remove from the beginning. So today we're going to create kind of just enough of a user interface to choose that entry point for the audio file. The idea behind what you see in this little design is that we, as the user, can drag left and right to move the audio waveform. The gray part on the left will be cut off, and the white part on the right will be retained. At any moment, we can inspect our entry point by hitting play, which will play from our entry point, and then we can hit stop to stop playing, and it goes right back to the entry point. So we're not offering a full play, pause, stop, seek kind of behavior. This is just enough to find the entry point for the audio to make sure we don't do a lot of extra work. I will also say that for today, we're not going to worry about the waveform graphic because calculating waveforms is kind of a separate concern. There might be a package that does that for us. There might not. We don't need to spend time on that. We want kind of everything you see here except for the waveform graphic. Let's see if we can make that happen. Let's come over here to the project, and we already have the app running. I'd like to be able to hack on this solution without constantly re-downloading an entire space. To do that, I'm going to replace the overall flow with just our single page. We're going to try to get it to work with an existing temporary audio file. And assuming that goes well, we can then just transplant it over to its real and final position in the overall flow. Let's give it a try. We'll define a page. We will then remove the SpacePod flow, and we will return that select audio entry point page. We know that in the actual flow, we expect to receive a file path where the downloaded audio can be found. So let's go ahead and introduce that. And I've located an existing temporary file because at the moment, SpacePod does not delete its old temporary files. So I've accumulated a bunch of these temporary files. And that's an example of one of them. Now let's save just to make sure that we see the placeholder, and we do. So now we want to fill in some of the visual details. First, we'll create a column. And our title should be Choose Audio Start Point. Choose Audio Start Point. And that style will then be SpacePod Text Styles Page Title. Let's save that, and there's our title right there. But we would like this to be vertically centered in that region. There we go. Then we need this rounded rectangle here. Now I believe we have a similar rounded rectangle right here on this screen. Let's go see how we chose to size that and see what we should copy. For that, we are looking for the check for Chrome flow, and we are looking for this prompt page. What we have here is a decorated box with a border radius of 32, so it looks like it takes the full width minus some padding. I'm just going to copy this whole thing for the moment. I might come back later and turn this into a shared widget, but for now we're going to take the easy and direct path. Okay, and I don't think we want to expand in all directions. I think we probably just want the maximum width. We can then probably remove everything from padding on down. For now, we don't need a child. We'll come back to that in a moment. But we do probably want a height. What is the height in the design? The height is 77 pixels. Let's call it 76. Okay, that is not 76. I'm guessing that what we need is something like this. Nope, that still doesn't seem to do it. Instead of a sized box, let's use a container. Let's bring the padding up into the container, and let's bring the box decoration up into the container as well. Okay, and I forgot that this padding is actually a margin, and we just want it to apply horizontally. And now we have the area where the waveform would theoretically go. Again, we're not going to create the waveform, but we do want this little playhead position here at the center. That's going to be a vertical blue line segment, or in our case, it might just be a very thin container with a rectangle on top of it and that timing information. Therefore, I think inside of this container, we probably want a stack. Then we can have a container whose width is, let's call it 2. The height is as much as possible. But we're going to take a little bit away from the top and the bottom. Let's take this box decoration. We'll use a border radius of 2. And for the color, we will set that directly. There's the line, but we don't want padding. I got that wrong again. We want margin. And there is our playhead. We can take that same widget except now instead of a width and a height, we will let it use its intrinsic size. Instead of margin, we will provide padding. And let's see if we select this text. It's tough to see what those numbers should be. We will guess and then we will check. Vertical, let's go 4. Horizontal, let's go 8. Color is the same. Border radius, let's see what the border radius is. Border radius is 4. For the child, we will write some text, which for the moment will match what we have in the design. And it looked like we probably wanted a monospace font. So let's see what we have for that. Looks like Phi Romano is probably all we've got. Size 12. Save that. And there it is. I think we could probably pull the padding back just a little bit. Let's try 2 and 6. I think that's better. And then we don't actually want to be centered. We want to be a little bit above center. We want to be about halfway between the center and the top. We will use alignment. Say alignment 0 and negative 0.5. That's a bit much, although perhaps the playhead should be a little bit closer to the top as well. Let's move that to negative 0.4, and let's pull the vertical padding here down to 4 pixels. I think that's looking pretty good. Now, let's create this play pause button. We will put that at the center on top of all the other stuff, and we will then offset it down. I don't know if it's best to put it in the same stack as the other 2 pieces, but that's how we'll start, and then we'll come back and revisit later. Let's see what the dimensions are. 50 by 50. Decoration, box, we want shape, box shape, circle, color white, and let's see what our shadow should be. Our shadow is an offset of 2, a blur of 8, and an opacity of 25. Box shadow, offset of 2, blur of 8, and a color which is black with opacity of, I believe I said 25%. Let's save that. Here it is over in the top left. That's not where we want it. And we will first align bottom center, and then we will apply a transform.translate. Actually, we want a fractional translation, and we want that to be 50% down. And now we have it where we want it. Inside of that circle, we would like a play icon. It's kind of obnoxiously thick, but I guess that's what we'll have to put up with. And technically, we want that to be slightly a dark gray, essentially. Okay, I'd also like for the mouse cursor to change when we hover. We will create a mouse region. Cursor will be system cursor click. Now here's a problem that might take something to solve. We have visually translated the location, but that visual translation did not move the tap region. So now we have to think about how do we get the tap region down here? And I know I've done things like this a million times, and yet I don't remember the typical way that I approach that. We'll come back to that, I guess, in a moment. We would like a gesture detector here on tap. We'll do that later. Let's extract all of this from the mouse region down to its own button widget. Let me change that implied API. We'll take a void callback, and then is playing will either be true or false. If I was building a more sophisticated system, or if I was publishing this as a package, I would do something a little more substantial with the API. But we don't need anything more substantial than that for our own purposes. So is playing on pressed. And then on tap, we'll call directly to on pressed. And the icon will say is playing. We want pause. Let's move the track to its own widget as well, and let's keep the button separate from the track. We'll copy from the container on down. And then we're going to move the play pause button out of here. I think I'm then going to put this entire thing into a stack. Let's see how this goes. Then we'll put the play pause button here. And then we will use an overall alignment. It's going to be much more difficult to consistently place this button where we want it, but because our window size is constant, we can probably get away with doing what I'm doing here. Let's see, what is it complaining about? Okay. Okay, as you can see, I've centered this button. Well, we're aligning this button based on the entire page size now. So we're starting at the center and I'm pushing it down little by little. And that's pretty much exactly where we want it. And now, because we are aligning within the page instead of translating the position, we now get a mouse interaction everywhere on that circular button. Now, at the page level, let's get some audio going on here. We know that we want to be able to play, and we know that we want to be able to stop. We know that we're going to have some kind of duration entry point, which will begin as duration.0. We're going to have to initialize some kind of audio system here. I've brought in a package called just audio. That's what we will be using today. So we will have an audio player. We will need to stop and dispose of that audio player. We will probably need to load the audio. And in fact, I was experimenting with this package in a dedicated entry point over here. So this is essentially what we want to do. And instead of hard coding the path, we will use the temp audio file path. In play, we will say audio player.play. In stop, we will say audio player.stop. Let's see, I think before we play, we would like to set the duration to the entry point. And didn't like that. Is that a query only? Okay, how do we set the position? Perhaps it's called seek? Yes, we can seek. Now, what I don't know about this package, given that seek is asynchronous, and given that play is asynchronous, what happens if I call them back to back? We're going to find out. All right. Is playing equals false? Again, in a more sophisticated app, we would directly query the audio player and make that the source of truth. But I think we might be able to get away with just maintaining our own variable. We'll create a method called toggle playback. If is playing, then we will pause, else we will play. Oh, I guess I called it stop. Okay. And then we will load audio in init state. Let's do a hot restart. Got a complaint here, cannot open. Okay. By the way, let's pass the initial position. That's probably a good thing to do. Now the problem, I think, is that the temp audio file path doesn't end with MP3 or MP4, it ends with .tmp. I was hoping that I would be able to set the file type. And now all of a sudden, I don't seem to have any autocomplete. Great. Okay, seek position, let's see. That's just a getter. Well, we can also set the audio source. So let's go see what an audio source is. Okay, I think what's going to happen here is I'm going to rename the temp file to .mp4. Because MP4 is the file format that x/Twitter downloads. And then where I hard code it, we're going to remove the .tmp. And then let's restart. And now let's play. And I think that is playing. We might, oh, there we hear it. Okay. See, sometimes the space includes intro elevator music, and sometimes it's silence, and it's anybody's guess which you end up with. So, what's next? Let's hot restart to make that stop. One thing we need to do is listen for audio player events. Player state stream dot listen. Again, in a package, I'd be a little more careful here, but because we simply need to re-render the play button whenever we go from playing. Actually, I'll tell you what, we don't even need to do that. We just need to set state. And I'll tell you what, I seem to have lost my auto completion for set state. This has been happening to me all day. I don't know what happened. But that should be enough to switch our button. So we should be able to say play. Nope. And that pause icon is way too large. So we're going to come down here and make the pause icon less large. maybe a 32. That's much more reasonable. So stop. It's actually a little difficult for me to tell whether it's truly stopping and restarting. Let's start with a duration that's further into the audio. Let's go minutes.
SaaS companies as open source, and then SaaS companies as open source.
Okay, good. That is what we want. And I just realized that I really don't want the pause icon at all. I want the stop icon.
SaaS companies as open source.
Is there a stop with an outline? Yeah.
SaaS companies as open source.
And now we can maybe bring this back up to 44. Is that too big? Yeah, that's reasonable. So now we're just 44 all the time. Okay. Now, what do we want to be able to do? We want to be able to tap on this track and drag left and right. When we drag to the left, we want this time to go up by some amount, and when we drag to the right, we want it to go down. We need to know the audio length so that we never allow the user to go beyond the length of the audio. Let's see what calling load actually returns. There's a duration, starts loading the current audio source, and returns the audio duration. What we're also going to do is, let's see, what happens while we are loading? I think while we're loading the audio, for now, just to avoid making this video too long for no reason, we're going to say if the audio length is null, we're not going to show anything. And then on entry point move, we will change the entry point to the new entry point. Down in the waveform track, we now need to surround our container with a gesture detector. And we want on horizontal drag update. I don't know if we can get away with a single method or not. Sometimes we need to know the starting offset, and sometimes we need to know when the user stops dragging, but we're going to give this a try. Now we need to think about when the user drags, how far does the user need to drag to move 1 second into the future? In practice, the user is only going to be moving maybe a minute or two into the audio. So let's say const pixel per second. Let's say 10 pixels. When you drag 10 pixels, you move 1 second. Now, what I'm thinking through in my mind is how we deal with the coordination of the fact that the entry, well, one, this track needs to know the current entry point so it knows how much to move. And I think this is why we're going to want to listen for on drag start and on drag end, because we need to know when the user actually kind of commits to a new entry point. This is the duration movement in this one frame, but really we actually don't want just the delta of this frame. We want the total delta. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and lean into this a bit. We're going to make this a stateful widget. We're going to declare on drag start. We're going to have an offset, which is drag start. Then we're going to have a full drag delta, which is equal to details.global position minus drag start. Drag start is going to equal the global position where we start. And as the user is dragging left and right at any given moment, this is now the duration change. We could say on entry point move, and then on drag end, we will say that. We notify when we move, and we notify when selected. Although, now that I think about it, the track already has the time number, and that's really the only thing that matters. So let me reverse course on what I just said. This will be on entry point selected. we need the current entry point to be passed to us. The selected entry point is the current entry point plus the delta. And then at the end, we will send the selected entry point. We will then, just for good measure, null out these values. Gesture detector on horizontal drag start, on horizontal drag end, we need to pass the current entry point, and then we now need to actually make this a call to set state because we're passing that into a widget, and that widget needs to be rebuilt. Let's come down to this timing, and we'll worry about time formatting later. For now, let's say widget, well, let us say selected entry point is not equal to null. Then we're going to say selected entry point dot seconds. Otherwise, we're going to say widget dot entry point dot seconds. All right, now it says 0. So when I'm moving, we're not rebuilding, and it's going negative. So first, this should be set state. Now you can see it's moving. We don't want to allow any negative numbers. So if we're negative, we don't want to do anything. Or I suppose we could say, just to be sure, that we're at 0. But also, well, let me show you what that does, and then I'll show you the problem. Okay, I'm also noticing that if I tap, it causes an error, and that's because we're not dealing with a canceled drag. For some reason, when I tap, it's running on drag end. If drag start is null, this drag end probably came from a tap or some other degenerate non-drag behavior. Do nothing. All right. Now we're dragging to the left, and you'll notice that it doesn't go negative. But if I start dragging back to the right, I have to drag all the way back, and only then does it start moving up. What we're going to do to fix that is when we go negative, we are actually going to change the drag start position. We're going to pretend that we started at the current location. So now I drag to the left, but then I start dragging right. Okay. I'm also noticing that I don't think these numbers are moving as quickly as I would like. Let's make them move twice as fast. Oh, we still got a problem here. What's going on? Okay. So dragging, let's see, dragging from here to here is a minute. That's still a bit much. Let's do 2 pixels per second. Another thing is that this is moving the opposite direction that I want it to. See, when we begin, I want to push to the left to make the number go up. I want this to be the opposite of what it is. And now we've reversed it. Okay. Then the question is, what's the easiest way to get a timestamp right there? I don't think that duration. Well, actually, you know what? Before we do a timestamp, let's actually see if this thing works.
So we last we have a really good come from the perspective that it's a tool.
I'd say so. I'd say as we move it, the audio starts at different places. I have no reason to doubt that that is respecting our entry point. So probably one of the last things that we need to do is to format this entry point to look like a timestamp. So first, the entry point is going to be selected entry point, otherwise widget.entryPoint, and then we need to get this into a timestamp. Here again, we can use some knowledge of the app that we're building to take a simpler approach that isn't as generic, but it actually will work for all of our use cases, like this. Hours is entry point dot in hours. Minutes, entry point in minutes. And seconds, entry point in seconds. We know that our space will go up to multiple hours, but it will never go beyond hours. It won't go into days. We'll create a little string buffer. If hours is greater than 0, then we will say timestamp buffer right. We want hours with, I think what we want is hours to string pad left, and then we want a colon. In the case that minutes is 0, we could remove minutes, but I think actually we always want minutes. Even when we're just dealing with a few seconds, I think we want minutes. And then we will return timestamp buffer toString. And then this property will become our text. All right, well, we still have seconds. The problem is in seconds is converting the whole thing to seconds. Let's see, what do we want here? Okay, we will say in seconds, and then we will integer divide by 60 seconds per minute, and we will also divide minutes by 60 minutes per hour. Okay. I think, sorry, this should be modulo. We want modulo. Yeah, there we go. There we go. And now you could imagine if we had a waveform, we could position that waveform based on this entry point, and we could make part of it gray and part of it white. But that waveform is for another day. There is some interesting glitching going on here. All right, well, I'll debug that. I don't need to take up your time for that. We've created all the interesting parts here. We're moving the entry point. We can play, we can stop. What I'm going to do off camera is I'm going to take this page. I'm just going to transplant it into the middle of the actual flow. All we need back from this page is the entry point. We already have the code elsewhere that will actually cut the audio. We just need to tell it where to cut the audio. We've built everything to do that. So I'll transplant the page, I'll report that entry point, and then our final audio file will begin exactly where we want it to. So thanks for watching the video today. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. I hope you are happy with what SpacePod is becoming. This channel is dedicated to building actual tools with Flutter. Might be professional, might be personal. There'll be a variety over time. If you enjoy that kind of thing, please do hit that subscribe button. Please do give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one.